Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Wow. A packed house. Thank you. My name's Henry Farini, and I am the last founding director of the Gloucester Writers Center. And we've been around for about 14 years now. And Fishtails has been around for about 12. And we're halfway through our 12th season of that. So we're very happy to be celebrating it in this tremendous room. I think one of the reasons that Fishtails is so popular is, well, I kind of rationalize it this way, is it's tied into our mission. And our mission is to honor and celebrate Cape Ann's rich literary legacy and to empower individuals to engage in writing and the telling of stories for civic engagement. So thank you for supporting that. Thank you. Originally, this program started in Vincent Farini's little shack at 126 East Main Street. And 1,000 people sitting around the gas stove because it was so cold in there, that was the only way to heat it, swapping stories one February evening. And from that, it grew to this, but in between that, Maureen Alward was one of our board members and took Fishtails by the fish head and really took it to the next level. And we brought, we did shows in bars in Gloucester and on aboard the Adventure and at the Cultural Center in North Shore, and finally we came here to the stage company, which we're very happy. And can everybody hear all right? Yeah. All right, good. Spent some time trying to deal with this microphone over the week, so I'm glad. I want to thank the stage company and Chris Griffin for their support and their neighborliness. And to Jennifer Brown, who plays with us, and holds a myriad of marketing details in the palm of her hand, and that's one of the reasons why we've been able to assemble such a great crew here. So thank you, Jennifer. I also want to thank our corporate sponsors, Ann Malloy from Neptune's Harvest, AAN, Mass Cultural Council, and Lobsterland. Now, we have a new sponsor for Illuminations, and we're happy to have Turner's Seafood that helped us out a lot. Kathy Turner, who I think is here someplace, came and rescued us by providing a chowder fest that brings all, when we did our rehearsal. And, having good food and good stories sort of go together. So we really grateful to Turner's for helping us out. And so please visit them in Gloucester, Salem, and Melrose. And I personally like their fish cakes. I think they're just really a great deal. So, we have the main emergency is that away where you came in. Another emergency is over here at this light if we need it. And if you do need to leave the show beforehand, please go through the main entrance. So with that, I'd like to pass the mic over to our dynamic mother and son team, storytellers, Sharron Cohen and Nathan Cohen.
I think we should take 1 minute to address the corners of the room, because you may not see our faces again. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your patience. When we first were going to do this program, we were going to do it in December. So we thought about illumination, and we expected that people would tell stories about Christmas lights and candles and things like that. And even before we moved to January, all of our storytellers came to us with stories of, powerful stories of self-realization and understanding and reaching even across the boundary of death for some kind of meaning of life. So I think we have a powerful program tonight, and I think we have some very brave storytellers, and I want to thank them for being here. And we're leaping right in with the first one, and Nathan will introduce him.
Our first storyteller is Sebastian Lovasco. Sebastian lives in Rockport, is currently a freshman at Salem State University, where he is majoring in geographic information systems. In the summers, he loves to get outside by working as bowman on the Thatcher Island launch. Otherwise, he spends much of his free time learning as much as he can about any topic that crosses his YouTube page. When there's none to be found, he appreciates nothing more than a good night of live performance, especially theater, especially with friends at his side. Please welcome Sebastian Lovasco.
I acted all throughout high school, and it was honestly the time of my life. Make fun of theater kids all you want, I promise you we deserve it. But we did put on a really good show at Rockport. They still do. And I still adore the art form, the collaboration, getting to explore yourself as you play a character. I loved it all, but one thing always made it so miraculous. Getting to invite the audience into an entire world that you've created. Ever since I was a kid, I just found it magical. So imagine my excitement. First show, senior year of high school. We're doing Little Shop of Horrors. We're finally past COVID. I get to play the dentist, which was really fun. Life was good. I got to the theater opening night about 90 minutes before showtime and just started my routine. I got into costume, I got my mic, I rehearsed my lines even though I knew them in my sleep by now, and was getting ready. Except as that first hour started going by, I noticed something, a stirring, let's call it. As time went on, I found that more and more of the excitement I had to bring this show to people was turning into genuine anxiety. You're nervous. You're nervous for a show. You have butterflies. That's what I told myself. It'd be fine. Right? Cut to about 30 minutes before showtime. We've all congregated backstage, and I am not improved. That room was always abuzz with nerves, as you could imagine, but I felt distinctly closed in on myself. It was like a dark wall was starting to go up around me. It's perfectly normal to have jitters before a show, but this wasn't that. It was crippling. And to this day, I don't know why I felt that. It's not like I mind an audience. I knew the show was going to be great. Little Shop is not a serious production, and yet I was feeling this way anyway. And so, for the next half hour backstage, one of the longest I've experienced, I sat there. Ugh. Trying to force words out to the people around me made me want to throw up, and it felt like my stomach was twisting into a black hole that would surely consume the world. And as the lights were dimmed backstage, I thought for sure that it'd be the last time I ever saw such a light, because I was obviously not surviving this whole ordeal. By the time our stage manager came through calling 5 minutes to places, I had never been so much of a mess. I'd gotten to the point where my entire body was so tight that it's the only time I've ever questioned whether I'd be able to do the show, which was about to start, whether I was ready for it or not. At about the last moment I could get away with, I crept forward into the wings to await my entrance and get ready, and I was kind of collapsing. The black hole in my stomach had reached its strongest, the wall felt like it would have fully enclosed around me. I didn't know what to do with myself, but eventually my cue came, so I had to go on stage, and there was light. There was warmth. The tension all flowed out of my body, and I started to sing. Scene 1 was rolling, and I wasn't in that dark, scary world anymore. I was in a new one. An entire new world of my own creation to share with my castmates and with the audience, and it was magical. I think the next 2 hours, for all that anticipation, were the best performance I ever gave at Rockport. And to this day, I never will forget the feeling of relief I got from those warm, old stage lights.
Thank you, Sebastian. Our next storyteller is Mark Efinger. Mark Efinger decided to participate in Fishtails in deference to friends and family who have all been subjected to hearing his stories again and again. His career has zigzagged through the U.S. Army, where he was a nuclear weapons officer, to Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, where he was a salesman and sales manager. After attending grad school in North Carolina, he became a wrestling coach and theater teacher at Phillips Academy in Andover. His wife, Cindy, and 3 sons want to thank this audience for letting him tell you one of his stories.
This is getting to be fun, right? Watching people up and down, up and down. All right, so it's January 1979, and the Army, in their infinite wisdom, sent this very green second lieutenant to Germany to run nuclear weapons missions. Now, I was a 22-year-old theater major from Middlebury College who'd taken a couple of ROTC classes, and that was it. Sergeant Anthony was a 43-year-old man with 25 years experience in the Army. In fact, he was fighting in Vietnam when I was in high school. And yet, because I had a college degree, and because I was a lieutenant, because of my rank, I was supposed to be this man's boss, running nuclear warhead missions, moving around nuclear weapons around Europe. Like, what's wrong with this story, right? So it was kind of a strange situation. Here I was. I knew that these ROTC classes that I had taken weren't really telling me anything I needed to know about moving nuclear warheads, let alone being a leader of men. The interesting thing, I was a very junior officer, but just because I was an officer, I was now supposed to be in charge of this 43-year-old sergeant and a platoon of 40 young soldiers. So, the very first day, I walk into the operations office, and Sergeant Anthony jumps up from his desk and says, "Hey, didn't I tell you guys, get all the sharp stuff off the lieutenant's desk so he doesn't hurt himself?" They all got a good laugh out of that, right? And I'm thinking, look, this is my introduction to the soldiers under my command. So I could feel the blood kind of rolling to my face as Sergeant Anthony very pleasantly walked out of the room saying, "Hey, LT, can I get you a cup of coffee?" Well, my first impression of this wild man was I had a little bit of a command problem. So my company commander warned me about him. "Hey, don't let that Sergeant Anthony push you around, Lieutenant. Remember who's in charge." Well, so here I was with all these soldiers, and he went on to say, "You know, couple of years ago, we had a field training exercise. We were out in the field for a long time, and the previous company commander, Major Sinclair, he left the soldiers out standing around in the rain for a really long time and made them miss a bunch of meals. And Sergeant Anthony was so upset by this and how the morale was really getting really low that he snuck up behind Major Sinclair, took off his baseball hat, and bam, whacked him right over the head. And he got away with it. Because he said, there was a bee on your head, and I just didn't want you to get stung. So after hearing this, I decided I better confront this problem. So I asked Sergeant Anthony a couple of days later if he'd walk down the hall with me, and we went into the supply room. It was empty. I said, listen, I have no illusions about who knows how to run nuclear warhead missions around Europe and who does not. But you're going to retire in a couple of months, and I got to be able to run this outfit after you leave. So the way I look at it, your job is to keep things going exactly the way you did before I showed up. Run the missions, make them on time, make them safe. And at the same time, you got to teach me how. Because I don't see anybody else around here who can. Well, he warmed up quite a bit after that, and we got along just great. In fact, we really worked together to create a very professional, cohesive team. The soldiers followed him. Man, when we were on a mission with nuclear warheads, they did exactly what he said, and they did it right on time. They followed him because he knew what he was doing, and he usually made it fun. Not bad, right? But most importantly, he taught me that if you're going to lead anybody, what you got to do is you got to understand their job and their life. So that was an important lesson. And as time went on, I learned to no longer see him as a problem, but really, I began to appreciate the respect he had for the soldiers and the jobs that they had to do to make things work with these missions. Well, I also began to realize that he was in a private war with this Major Sinclair, and I began to realize that now Sinclair had been promoted. He was now a lieutenant colonel and was our battalion operations officer. And I began to realize that, well, he was generally the ass that created most of the Army shit that we all had to deal with, right? So one day, for example, this is about 3 or 4 days before Anthony was to retire and leave Germany for good. And Lieutenant Colonel Sinclair chose this very moment. We had a really crazy, busy nuclear warheads mission going on, scheduled like all week long. And so he decided to impose, just to get his revenge on Sergeant Anthony, impose a inspection drill on us in the middle of all these. Now this is a nuclear weapons destruct drill. We're going to blow up everything in case the Russians are going to overrun us. And this is being imposed right in all these missions that we had to do. So the morning of the inspection, Anthony was pissed mad. We're standing there at morning formation, and all of a sudden he goes, bam, stomps on this big yellow jacket. And then he picks it up and he puts it in his shirt pocket. And he goes, now, remember that, Lieutenant. Oh, and then we got in a Jeep and we drove out to the exclusion area, where Sinclair was there with his whistle and his stopwatch. He started the drill, right? And everybody's running everywhere. 2 hours later, all the rest of the soldiers are getting in the trucks and they're heading for safe ground to be undercover, while I'm bringing all those wires into the T-handle, and Sergeant Anthony is standing there checking off nuclear weapon bunker 1, nuclear weapon bunker 2. And Sinclair's watching all of us like a hawk, and I'm putting the wires onto the thing. And Anthony comes up behind Sinclair with his cap, winds up like a baseball pitcher, and wham, right on his head. Well, instead of getting court-martialed for this massive insubordination, Anthony bends over, leans down on the ground, and picks up this large dead bee. And he goes, I got him this time. You want a souvenir? So the message here, totally unexplained, was absolutely clear. Don't laugh when you're pointing out to a superior officer that he's being a jerk. And now, most of Anthony's lessons were kind of like this, unexplained. Except 2 or 3 days later, I drove him up to the airport to leave Germany and say goodbye and retire. And I got out of the car. This lesson, he decided to clearly make sure he illuminated how he felt about me. So I got out of the car and I went over to shake this man's hand and say goodbye and thank you. And he snapped to a perfect salute. Something I realized I had never seen him do. And then he said, "In the Army, sir." And I realized I had never heard him say sir before. We salute the officers placed over us as a sign of respect. So Mr. Illumination had clearly pointed out to me that respecting another person's work is the best way to gain their respect. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Ari Marcovski. Ari wishes he could make a living collecting and creating shapes with wood. But for now, he happily works as a kindergarten teacher. Love brought Ari to Gloucester in 2019, and he hopes to stay here for as many decades as possible. Ari Marcovski.
Why is it that we often think we see clearly when we're actually blind? I was swinging in my backyard when relatives I hadn't seen in years pulled up in my driveway, all silent and gray. My mother had died after a long illness. I was 12. I didn't know how to deal with that wound, and my father couldn't help me. And so I retreated away from that darkness, ironically, since it was my ticket to healing. And I shoved all those feelings down, and I locked them up, along with my ability to love. I became what someone once called a happy asshole. And for almost 30 years, I hid in a cloud of pot from my feelings, and I convinced myself that I was happy. When my Orthodox grandmother disowned me for marrying outside of her faith, I accepted this betrayal. When my marriage started to fall apart, I thought I was fine. But eventually, I started acting out. I didn't understand why. And my body started yelling at me. I developed a gut disorder. I believe that often the ailments that we manifest correlate with an underdeveloped skill. And since I couldn't digest difficult things, my gut, where things get digested, started malfunctioning. Terrifying, paralyzing fear of loss. That's why Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, and that's why I couldn't swim through the dread and reach acceptance and full human functionality. I remember crying at my therapist's office, saying, "Tell me what to do. What stones do I turn? How do I heal? Tell me what to do." I didn't just want to sit there. I wanted to do something. And she wisely turned it around. She said, "Don't just do something, sit there." And so I did. And as I did, my feelings started to bubble up and wash over me. And for the first time ever, I felt rage toward my father and my disowning family. And I felt sadness and longing for my mother, wishing she had seen me become a man and a father. And I felt the sorrow and the dread and terror, knowing that if I ever risked real love again, that I would inevitably open myself up to loss again too. This started shaking things up in me. And my inner jail cell started to fall apart. But my pot addiction still had a strong hold on me, and I dated incessantly, claiming that committed relationships were unnatural. But the truth is, I really couldn't touch the deeper layers of my feelings yet. But as I sat there, my feelings kept bubbling up. And as I cried, I could tolerate them more. And as I tolerated them more, I didn't need pot to hide from them. And I could reach deeper layers and go to yoga and open up. And as I opened up, I cried and I tolerated and so on. I was coming alive for the very first time. I was also able to become the father to my son that my father couldn't be for me. I remember beaming with joy one day on my yoga mat, feeling like, wow, I'm coming alive. Wow, I'm co-creating my life. Oh, I'm conjuring what will happen. I'm excited and ready to see who will I meet. And a week later, I met my partner, Sarah. And our love and our depth and the range of our love has become proof to me that I could boldly and wildly and courageously love again. My fear of loss is still big, but I can breathe through it, and my heart is wide open. The other day I was at a hair salon, and I was waiting to get my braids redone, and I was chatting with a lady next to me. She had a big cross around her neck, and we were chatting, and as we chatted, she found out that I'm not religious at all. And all of a sudden she asks, do you mind if I pray for you? I was caught off guard. I didn't want to insult her, create a scene. I said, sure, as long as it doesn't hurt. But I wish I had said no thank you. You're confusing darkness with light.
Our next storyteller is Laila Goodman. Laila is a biology teacher, doula, and magician. She considers her storytelling to be a necessary practice to explain the many chapters of her life, from growing up with a magician father to riding horses with urban cowboys in South Florida, to being the spiritual advisor at a Jewish high school in Boston. She lives in Magnolia in a house that her husband's grandfather bought in 1934. Laila is also the person who runs our workshops that helps the storytellers craft their stories from the beginning. So, Laila.
That house in 1934 cost $3,300. And I think it was a lot of money then. I grew up in Hollywood, Florida, between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. It was still a young metropolis then, with ranches and farms just west of the city. When I was 12, my father bought my twin sister and I a horse, thinking that if we were involved with horses, it might keep us out of adolescent trouble. It didn't. We boarded the horse at the Flying Jaws Horse Ranch, which was just across State Route 7. Flying Jaws was managed by Bob, who lived on the property in a small trailer with his wife and his young adult son. Bob was a tall, skinny man with 4 buck teeth, usually stained brown from his chain-smoking habit. He would emerge each morning around 7 from the trailer with a cup of coffee in one hand, a Budweiser in the other, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. And he would stay like that all day long, except without the coffee. After the ranch was populated by like a pretty large group of kids, maybe 30 kids, like my sister and I, whose parents had bought them a horse and were willing to pay for the upkeep of a horse, and a handful of urban rodeo riding cowboys. They were kind of modern day cowboys because they drank bud and smoked pot. So after I had been at the ranch about a year, Bob's son tragically was electrocuted at a workplace accident. He was killed by a faulty drill. My father, who was an attorney, agreed to represent the family, and he got them a small sum in a wrongful death settlement. And instead of taking a % of the money, he negotiated with Bob that we would get free rent for our horse for the next couple years. My last full day at the ranch was Christmas Day when I was 14. My sister and I set out to go to the ranch, as we did every day, either after school or all day when we could. And slowly kids trickled in, many of them bringing Christmas presents for Bob, either a bottle of whiskey or a card with cash. And so pretty early in the day, Bob started sipping whiskey instead of his customary beer. And he got uncharacteristically, obviously drunk. He was yelling belligerently, kind of tripping, slurring words. And soon a group of kids had kind of gathered around him in a circle, and they were teasing him and tormenting him and just making fun of him and trying to get him to do more and more outrageous things. At one point, a boy came up and he had a card with cash. And instead of giving Bob the card, he took the cash and he threw it on the ground. It's like, if you want it, pick it up. At that point, it was crystal clear to me that I did not want to be part of this mob of privileged kids taunting this alcoholic, grieving father. I kind of pulled my sister and we walked away, and I went and sat down on the front porch railing. About a half an hour later, I could kind of hear the crowd getting closer, and suddenly Bob came behind me, grabbed me very violently, and he screamed, "You fucking kike!" As I twisted to get out of his body, out of his hands, my body slammed against the railing, and he continued to yell, "You Jews, you Jews, you think you're better than everyone else. You don't even pay rent for your horse." And at that point, he started walking towards my horse's stall, and he picked up a stick along the way, and he opened up her stall door, and he pulled the horse out, and he was really threatening to hit my horse. I switched instantly from compassionate upstander to fierce protector. I grabbed a 2x4 and I slammed it against the back of his head as hard as I could. He barely flinched, but he let go of the horse. So I went up, I grabbed the horse, I calmed her down, and I got her safely back in her stall. I said to my now hysterical sister, it's time to go. We got to get out of here. And as we started to walk down the long dirt driveway, Bob reached in his pocket, pulled out his knife, and flung it at us. It missed by a mile, but it was terrifying. I only saw Bob one last time about a week later when I went to move the horse to a new ranch. He didn't apologize, but he seemed contrite. He seemed ashamed, and I felt sorry for him. I don't know what unleashed his vitriolic anti-Semitism, but I often think he felt more humiliated by the fact that I walked away from the mob instead of participating in the mob. As I've told this story over the years, I have not focused on the anti-Semitism or the physical harm, though both have always been part of the story. But really, it was the day that my strength was illuminated. My strength and courage to walk away from a mob, my strength to protect, to be a fierce protector when it was called on, and my strength to see the humanity and feel compassion for another, even one who had caused me harm. Thank you.
Sharron Cohen. Sharron Cohen has had a checkered career. As an Air Force officer, physical therapist, shopkeeper, school library aide, bookmobile librarian, writer, and mother of me, and an equally checkered volunteer life as a photographer, genealogist, lighthouse keeper, and grandmother. She is also a co-storyteller in residence for this season's Fish Tales. You may have noticed that, but it was written here, so I read it anyway. Sharron Cohen.
All the way down. I was 22 years old when I figured out what thinking might be. Now, I always thought I could think, because I was good in school. But that was less about thinking and more about being good at taking tests. But when I was 22, I left the clinic where I had worked all day in Montgomery, Alabama, and I got into a car with my then husband and a couple of his college friends, and we drove 2 hours to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. We got there early because we wanted to get good seats down in the front of the lecture hall. So we waited, and eventually a student came out on stage escorting an incredibly elderly gentleman. And that elderly gentleman sat down in an overstuffed Queen Anne's chair and began to talk about his life. And he started at the beginning. He started with the fact that he had been born so far-sighted that the first 6 years of his life were spent in what was essentially an impressionist painting. He could see color, but there were no edges, there were no details. He went to school and he was diagnosed, he was given glasses, and at the age of 6, for the first time, the world popped into focus for him. He went on to talk about his education, his philosophy, his writings, his inventions, his wives, and then he took an intermission. Now, this had been really interesting, but it had also been really lengthy. And we were keenly aware of how long it was going to take us to get back to Montgomery. I had to work in the morning. The guys had classes in the morning. But we were never going to hear this man speak again. And how much more could he say? Really. He had already covered his life. So we decided to wait, and eventually he came back on the stage, and this time there was an easel next to his chair with charts and maps, and he started to talk about the great sea voyages of Magellan and Vasco da Gama and the NASA space program, and he talked about the Earth itself as a ship on the greatest imaginable ocean, and he told us we'd better take care of that ship because we'd be in trouble if we didn't. And this was truly fascinating, but it was really late, and we really, really, really had to go. So we got up as unobtrusively as we could from those really good seats down front and, made our way to the long, long center aisle to the back of the hall. And when I reached the back of the hall, I turned around. And in that very moment, the man dropped the capstone of the lecture into place. Back in high school, there was a chemistry experiment, and some of you did this chemistry experiment, I know you did. There was a flask of opaque liquid, I remember mine being pink, and we titrated in 1 drop at a time of a liquid until the liquid in that flask went clear. I have no clue what I was supposed to learn from that experiment. But what happened in that flask is what happened that night in Tuscaloosa. That entire lecture went clear from beginning to end. This was no genial old man talking about his life. This was Buckminster Fuller talking, this was Buckminster Fuller talking about seeing the world in a new way. And I was dumbfounded. I, who thought I was smart, who'd always been told I was smart, understood in that moment that I'd been playing chopsticks on a toy piano in a world that contained people who could play Mozart on a Steinway. As I stood in the back of the hall, that realization burst out of me, and my neurons hung in the air like stardust for a long, long moment before they collapsed inside me again, and I thought, oh my God, I'd like to do that again. I was 22 years old when I understood how much power and how much pleasure I could derive from one moist, sensitive, nerve-dense organ in my body. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Our next storyteller is Sash Ludwig. Sash came to Cape Ann in the spring of 1977 for a summer job, and she never left. Cape Ann does that. She married Gloucester native Craig Dulong. They have a son, Ben, who will soon be marrying the love of his life, Shannon. Sash's background includes restaurant management and counseling psychology, specializing in the treatment of adolescents and their families. For the past 33 years, she has worked as a national marketing director with the Juice Plus company, a world leader in whole food nutrition. And for fun, she is a member of the Cape Ann Gig Rowers. Sash.
Have you ever gotten a phone call that changed your life? I did. It was on July 20th, 1988. It had been raining torrentially the night before. But in the morning, I could see through the skylight there was a patch of blue, and it was pushing the edges of the gray to the side. And then suddenly, the whole room was filled with joyful sunlight. And just then, the phone rang. And the man on the other end of the line identified himself as a sergeant with the Cambridge Police Department. And after a few words, he said, "We found your brother." There was a sound that came from the well of my belly, up through my stomach and out through my mouth. It was so alien, such an alien sound, that it scared me. I screamed, not only because of the shock of the news, but because Bobby had slipped through my fingers. I really thought I had a pulse on the situation. I thought he was getting better. He seemed upbeat, elated almost. He was getting things done. I asked the sergeant, "Was it suicide?" And he said, "It looks that way." And then I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "We're in your brother's apartment. The super let us in." And then I thought, "Well, how did you know to call me?" And he said, "There's a note on the wall over the phone in the kitchen that said, 'Call my sister.'" So I went downstairs and I made those dreaded calls, first to my other brother, Peter, then to his girlfriend, and then to his doctor that we wished that he had spent a lot more time with for the depression and the anxiety and the excruciating stress from his job. And the last person I called was his boss. And I said, I identified myself, and I said, "Bob won't be into work today." And I thought about that for a second. And I said, "Actually, Bob won't be back at all." And then I drove to Cambridge to the police department. They were very kind. And they gave me a large manila envelope from all the letters they had collected from my brother's dining room table. They weren't sealed. And his personal effects. And I went to my car and I dumped everything out on the passenger seat. And I was looking through his personal effects, and not among them were his keys. Notable about my brother was that he always had his keys in his pocket. He patted them habitually to make sure that he had his keys. Because if you left the building, you might not get back in, because the super did not like to be bothered. This was a building that I actually had keys to, because at one point in my life I had lived there with my mother when she sold our family homestead. And we moved to this building right on the edge of Cambridge Common when I was 14. I took the elevator up to the 5th floor where he lived, and I stood in front of the door and I had knots in my stomach. I did not want to go in. I didn't know what the police had done. They had warned me that all alleged suicides were first investigated as homicides. I didn't know what state my brother was in when he'd left in the night into the rain. Had he left his apartment in disarray? And mostly I didn't want to go in because I knew that I would never be in there with him again. But I opened the door very carefully and I walked into the foyer and I was shocked at what I saw. The place was immaculate. Now my brother was a very neat man, but this looked like it had been staged by a realtor. And there were sticky notes all over the place telling me what to do. Now he had left me 2 letters, which I had read. The first one had said that he had made me the executor of his estate, and he had left his entire estate to me to care for his daughter. And the second letter had told me about 5 or 6 pages of handwritten notes, all the things he wanted me to do. And then I saw all these sticky notes that, this painting goes this way and this dish goes, it was everywhere. But I began to go through everything. I went through his desk, I went through his drawers, I went down the hall and I opened all the closets. I wanted to know what he wanted me to know about him, and he left exactly what he left for me exactly what he wanted me to know, nothing more and nothing less. And then it was my habit, after going through everything, looking for the keys especially, to open his refrigerator. Now, he and I shared a passion for cooking. I loved to cook, and he did too, and we loved to eat good food. And it used to be when I would visit him, I'd open up a refrigerator and I'd hang on the edge of the door and I'd go back and forth and admire all his leftovers. And I opened the refrigerator and I hung on the door and I went back and forth, but it was empty. The only thing in there was a little jar of capers, some cocktail onions, and a little bit of milk left in the carton. I kept returning to the apartment because there was so much to do. And then there was a late July afternoon, maybe it was August, I can't remember. And I came into the apartment and there was a big ray of sunshine coming through the living room window, across the living room. It was so bright, it was a shaft so bright that there were little particles of dust frolicking in it. And the light pulled me down the hall to his bedroom. And there I stood at his bureau. I had been looking for these keys day after day, and there they were on the back of the bureau, just under the folded, ironed white handkerchief. I don't know why I hadn't seen them before. And I heard his voice, and I felt the light wrap all around, and I heard his voice. And he said, "See, I didn't let you down. I thought of everything, and I felt the light all around me. And then I knew that Bobby was okay."
Luke Rashawn Schoel is a lifetime resident of Cape Ann and a raconteur of tall tales about fish and adventure. He adores his 4 children and his new bride. When he is not spinning stories, he builds houses, crafts charcuterie boards, and forages for mushrooms. Luke Rashawn Schoel. I think that's it. Pretty good. Pretty good.
That's what happens when your mom writes your bio. I'm sorry. Sorry, Mom. So, when I was 6 years old, my father decided it was time for me to learn how to summit a mountain, okay? So we strap on these World War II skis and we head out. And I tried hard. I went up and I slid down and I fell down and I went up and I slid down and again and again and again. Sisyphus and I, best friends, right? Right on the same page. And finally, I fall down at the foot of the impenetrable 8-foot mountain in the backyard, and I'm looking up at my father, and I just say, "Life is hard, Papa." You know, and he crouches down, you know, he just basically takes up my whole visual space, and he says, yeah, life is hard. And he says, "Unfortunately, because you're a Schoel, you are only going to learn things through the 2x4 method," which, if you're not familiar with the 2x4 method, it's when someone takes something about the size of the skis and comes up behind you and smacks you in the back of the head, and that's really the only way you're going to garner any real information. So as you can imagine, illumination and revelation for me, despite my many attempts in life, has been sort of a difficult thing to get to. But I do think that there's like sort of certain, we have a human compact that we all sort of agree on that shouldn't necessarily be a revelation. Like when you're walking down the street with somebody, you're really assuming that they didn't wake up and say, "Today's a good day that I'm not going to commit homicide," right? I mean, that's sort of our deal, you know. That's not what my issue is. We're all safe here. Everybody's cool. Unfortunately, what I've struggled with my whole life is the inverse. I've had deep depression and thoughts of suicide basically my whole adult life. And about 20 years ago, I tried to kill myself. And I woke up in Beverly Hospital 3 days later to the doctor saying that when he went off shift prior to coming back, that my heart rate, my blood pressure, and my breathing had dropped so low that he just assumed when he came back that I was going to be dead. From there, I went to rehab. And in rehab, you probably heard the term, fake it until you make it, right? And I was really good at that. I really was. I was highly skilled at faking it until I made it. But at that point, I was still just faking it. And then something happened. April 6, 2006. And it was as if I was sitting in my backyard in August, and that first firefly comes out in the evening. And April 6th is the day that my son was born. And as I sort of sat in my mental, emotional yard, other fireflies started to come out. The birth of my daughter Miranda, the birth of my daughter Seraphine, and the birth of my daughter Aria. And their bioluminescence allowed me to see all of the other people and moments and aspects of my life. My mother, my sister, my uncle, who actually was the man who drove me to the hospital, who saved my life. Even my absolute pain in the ass cousin who's sitting right there. He still has a light that illuminates my life. And I've been able to take these sparks and take these little fireflies and I put them into a jar. And when it's dark, because it still gets dark, and when it's hard and I'm cold and I'm scared shitless, I get to pull out my jar. And it helps me get through. Because at the end of the day, life is hard. I was right then and I'm right now, okay? But I just hope that my fireflies are proud of me, that even when life is hard, and even when I keep falling down that mountain, I know now that I'll never stop trying.
Really grateful you're still with us. I want to thank both Sash and Luke, for sharing such powerful personal stories. If you or somebody that you care about is struggling with thoughts of suicide, there is 988 is a number you can text or call. Stuart Siegel. Stuart Siegel, who dropped out of rabbinic school twice, has been an educator for more than 26 years. He and his wife Emily were directors of the nonprofit Sonoran Desert Inn in Ajo, Arizona for 6 years before moving to Gloucester with their children, Jonah and Bela. Stuart is currently the executive director of the Schooner Adventure. Despite being a native Floridian, he plans to spend the rest of his life in his house on the edge of Dogtown. Stuart Siegel.
So I spent about 10 years of my life trying to be holy. I grew up in suburban South Florida, unholy, and I was seeking for meaning in life, seeking to get close to myself, to get close to God, to find something bigger in existence than Publix. I meditated, I wrote poetry, I went to rabbinic school twice. I dropped out of rabbinic school twice. One time I spent 24 hours wearing a white robe, sitting in a small cave, praying and meditating on mushrooms. That didn't really work. I spent 2 years living in Israel at a yeshiva. For those who don't know a yeshiva, in short, it's a place where young, usually Jewish guys live together, pray together, study holy books together in an attempt to maybe get a little more holy. So I lived in this place, and this was on the evening of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, maybe the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. We don't eat, we don't engage in most physical, bodily pleasures or engagements. We are as if we were dead, as if we were angels. The places of prayer are covered in white. Everything is white and pure, and we're really focused on atoning, clearing out who we've been for the past year, for better or worse, and focusing on who we want to be in the time to come. So this night we had finished our prayers, about 3 hours or so. Everybody else had gone off to bed, but I needed something more. So I looked around the shelves and I finally picked out a little purple book of prayers called The 50th Gate by a Hasidic guy named Reb Nassim. And I open it up, and I'm sifting through and just sort of randomly pick a spot. And it's this long, long prayer all about sin. I'm not really into sin. I mean, I'm into sin, like I do them. My wife, everyone. But that's not my connection spiritually. I'm not like, oh God, I committed sin. Ooh, God, take me back. I'm seeking communion, understanding, connection with people, myself, God. But for some reason, this prayer got me. And I'm reading it, and the language is incredibly florid. My sins are etched in my bones. I'm feeling it. And I'm standing there. I had walked up to the rabbi's lectern in the front of the room, and I was there all by myself, and I had the book out, and it's saying that my sins are so great and so many and so numerous, and that the angels on high, the most powerful beings there are, they tremble before the God of the universe. But me, this putrid drop of nothing, this clod of dirt, rife with sin, I dare to rebel against God by not being who I should be, by not being what I can be, by rebelling against the glory of my true nature. And this is hitting me hard, and I start crying. And I'm standing there crying over this book, and I'm reading it, and it continues, and it says, if I felt the tiniest fraction of a fraction of the pain I'm causing to my soul through the way that I am distancing myself through who I could be, if I felt that, the world could not contain my screams. The universe could not handle the horror that I would feel inside, and I am bawling. And I am shaking over the book, and my eyes are closed, and the tears are coming out, and the tears they're weird. They're bigger. They're coming out of the wrong part of my face. I open my eyes, and the book is red. And red is splashing down on the book, and I am I'm bleeding out of my nose, and I'm not praying anymore. And I look down and I say, Jesus Christ, I'm bleeding on the prayer book on Yom Kippur. And I grab a tissue, I start blotting out the book, I hold my nose, and then I do what anybody would do in the situation. I stole the book, and I ran out of the room. And I stuck it under my bed until I went back to America, and I don't know, stuck it somewhere. Yeah. So I spent 10 years trying to be holy. About 17 years ago now, it's been since I bled for that attempt. Did I make it? Am I holy now? Thanks. Okay, we're done. I don't know. I haven't figured it out. But you know what? Tonight when I go home, I'm going to pray about it.
Nathan is the father of my grandchildren. And that's pretty much all you really need to know about him. But I'll tell you a little bit more. Nathan Cohen, a native of Gloucester, is director of orchestras for the Rockport Public Schools, an adjunct professor of music at Endicott College, where he directs their chamber music ensemble, and the co-founder of the band What Time Is It, Mr. Fox? Nathan.
The largest religious structure in the world is Angkor Wat. It's in Cambodia. And I was 33 years old and I was traveling there alone. That's not entirely true. I don't travel alone. When I travel with my teddy bear. So I was a 33-year-old man traveling with his teddy bear in Southeast Asia. And when you arrive at Angkor Wat, it's a little overwhelming. There's this bustling thoroughfare in front of the structure, and there's vendors, and there's tourists riding elephants. It's a whole thing. But then there's this long sandstone bridge that extends across this moat, this canal of pristinely calm water that surrounds the whole area. And every step you take crossing over this bridge, it's like you're entering a different time and a different place. And the area is huge. It's huge. There's 1,000 structures, and they're all intricately carved with these bas-relief friezes telling stories of ancient Hindu mythology. The site was dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu when it was first built 1,000 years ago, and later became a holy site for Buddhists and other religions of the area. And I didn't know any of that. It was a really great photo opportunity, and my teddy bear is really photogenic, and we were having a really good time wandering around in these throngs of people taking photos. And I had this passing thought, what would it be like to meditate in a place that had been holy for 1,000 years? And I closed my eyes just where I was standing, and I had a full-on out-of-body experience. I had this visceral, ripped-out-of-my-body sensation, and I was flying backwards out of my body, and I saw myself, and I saw Angkor Wat, and I was flying back through the blackness of our solar system, and I opened my eyes because it was really terrifying. And I had some questions. Was this a thing that was in my head? Was this a thing that was coming to me from outside of me? Is there a difference between those things? What would have happened had I kept my eyes closed? How far out would I have gone, and what is at the edge? And I shut my eyes again. And it was instantaneous, same thing, ripped out of my body, flying backwards. I see myself, I see the earth, the solar system. I start seeing stars flying by. The Milky Way takes shape and is flying away from me like some ship leaving port, and suddenly entire galaxies are spinning by me. And in a flash, I have the sensation that I am inside something organic, and in another flash, I am right back where I started, and there I am, and I'm flying away from myself, and the earth is flying away. And I open my eyes, and I'm chewing on the implications of that. Because if every particle in the entire universe is me on repeat, that means that every person in the world, and I think living or dead or yet to be born, although I'm not sure how the math works, is also me on repeat. That means my teddy bear is me on repeat, which I think I actually already knew. And that also means that if somebody else did this, that I would be part of them on repeat. And now I'm picturing this interwoven, geometric, collective consciousness like turning through time. And I shut my eyes again because I want more. And this time there was just silence. And in the silence there was this word, and it was a word that I repeated for the rest of the day because I didn't want to forget it, and at the time it was unfamiliar to me. And the word that was in the silence was samsara. Do you know this word? Yeah, it's a real word. It's important in Hinduism and Buddhism and other religions of this area. It's from Sanskrit, and it translates to several things, but flowing, wandering, the world, and it has to do with karmic cycles of rebirth and redeath and reincarnation. In a lot of these faiths, there's a spiritual quest to transcend samsara. The idea that samsara, that our lives are bustling and full of meaninglessness, and this transcendence is maybe finding meaning, maybe something that is beyond me. And I think about that when we come together and we tell stories. And I think we know that we are innately connected to each other, but if we come together and we're by the glow of a fire and the warmth of these lights, the story for me is taking a frame and putting it around my moment of wandering and inviting you to lean in and say, does this mean anything to you? I was still repeating samsara over and over as I was leaving Angkor Wat that day. And each step I took on the bridge over the canal, heading back towards the bustle of the tourists on the elephants and the rest of the world beyond, every step I took, the now loud and comforting silence behind me was fading away. And I got right up to the edge of the water, and I took that last step into the street, and I shut my eyes one more time, and the line was totally dead. And I turned around, and in that perfect stillness of the water in the canal, that canal itself like a frame around that place, in that perfect stillness, the towers of the temples were reflected so pristinely that it was like there were two identical images, and each of them was as real as the other. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to invite all our storytellers up.
Thank you all for being here tonight to hear us.
Big things to break down fast, and nothing to last. Americone baloney, Americone baloney, Americone baloney, Americone baloney. Big things to break down fast.